Hello dear children, welcome you all back to science class. In our last class we have learned about categories of living components. In today's class we are going to begin with the next topic, that is food chain. Now what do you mean by food chain? We have already learned that producers are living organisms which will prepare their own food. So here we know that we have plants around us as producers because they are organisms or living organisms. They prepare their own food, isn't it? Yes. Now these plants are eaten by animals and animals also eat other animals as their food. So animals will depend on plants and they also depend on other animals for their food. Now look into this picture here. Here we see a plant which is eaten by a rat, and this rat is eaten by an owl. Same way we have carrot from carrot plant. Now these carrots are eaten by rabbit, and rabbit is eaten by a fox, and this fox is eaten by a lion. So here we see that this forms a small chain or series. So this chain or series of organisms that are linked together by the process of eating or being eaten for food is known as food chain. Which means each of these organisms are linked together by the process of eating or being eaten by other organisms for food is known as food chain. So food chain is a series of organisms that are linked together by the process of eating or being eaten, especially for food, is known as food chain. Now look into each of these food chains. Here we see that this food chain, the first one, it starts with a corn plant. And the second one, it starts with a carrot plant. And the third food chain here, as you see, grass, which is eaten by grasshopper, and grasshopper is eaten by a frog, frog by a snake, and snake by an eagle. So again, it starts with grass. So always remember, food chain starts always from plants. So in all these three cases, we have seen that each of these food chain, it starts from plant. Now, let us see few more examples of food chain. Now, look into this picture here. Here we see grass is eaten by deer, deer is eaten by a lion. In the same way, here in this next food chain, we see grass is eaten by grasshopper, and grasshopper is eaten by a frog, frog is eaten by a snake, and snakes are eaten by eagle. So here in both these examples of food chain, we see that it starts with a plant. So always remember, food chain starts with a plant. Now these plants, otherwise known as producers, they are eaten by herbivores, which means animals that feed on plants. And these herbivores are further eaten by carnivores. So always remember, in a food chain, it starts always with plants, and plants are eaten by herbivores. So here we can see deer and grasshopper, they are herbivores. And these herbivores are further eaten by carnivores. Now, can you think of what happens if any one of this animal or this plant is not there in the food chain? If any one organism is missing in the food chain, it will affect the balance of nature. So in a food chain, all these organisms are linked to each other, or each of this food chain are linked to one another. And therefore, if any one plant or animal die in this food chain, then it will affect the entire balance of nature. Now let's take an example. Look into this picture here. Here we see grass is eaten by deer and deer is eaten by lion. Now, can you think of what happens if suddenly lion disappears in the forest? So if all the lions in the forest disappears, then naturally the population of deers will increase, which means since there are no lions to eat deer, the number of deers in the forest would increase, isn't it? Yes. Now when there are too many deers in a forest, there will not be sufficient grass which is available for all these deers to consume. And there will also be no sufficient grass for other animals to consume. As a result, these animals will die due to starvation, which means they will lack their food, that is grass, and they will die due to starvation. Hence, it is important that all these plants and animals are required to complete a food chain. So we have seen that when there is no line in food chain, it disrupts the balance of nature, which means the number of deers in the forest would increase. And when number of deers in forest increases, all of them need more amount of grass. And when more amount of grass is required by all of them, then all this grass would be used up, or there would not be sufficient amount of grass for all these animals or deers to eat, and thus they will die due to starvation. So that is why it is important that all these animals and plants are necessary to complete a food chain. Then only we can maintain a balance in nature.